special guest with me today, Sergeant Thomas Finch.
Yeah, retired. Yeah, Sergeant retired.
So welcome to the
Thank you.
podcast. I'm so happy to have
Thank
you here, and I'm honored to have you because I think you just represent so many different things in healing and in empowering people and helping people be stronger,
Thank you.
and inspiring them to
Thank
be
you.
their best selves. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yes, so thanks for joining me.
Okay.
So let's start with your backstory a little bit.
Man, so backstory like when I was a little boy, or backstory?
Past lives, I don't care. We can do
That's a neat one. I think probably the really quick, easy version. I was born and raised in Ohio, and I moved to Pennsylvania to go to college. So 4 years to college in Pennsylvania. When I got out of college, I did a couple little odd jobs, right after I graduated. And then my degree was in psychology, so I had this idea that I was going to be a practicing psychologist or counselor. I graduated in 1991, 89. The American Psychological Association stopped licensing master's degree holders. So the plan was to go to college, get a master's degree, and kind of do that. So when that didn't happen, I was like, okay, if I got to go get a doctorate, is that something that I want to do right now? So I didn't do that. So I spent about a year writing behavior treatment plans at a group home for kids. My best friend at the time, he was 2 years ahead of me in college. He was like my big brother, and whatever he did, I was going to do. And he was a New York State trooper.
Okay.
So the law enforcement bug kind of bit me. I took this kind of long route. I entered in through corrections. So I did corrections for about 6 months, and then probation and parole for about a year. And then I was a full-time police officer for 15 years and retired at the rank of sergeant. And, during that journey, I was an academy instructor, and my job at the academy was physical fitness was kind of the primary area, but I was, by designation, I was what was called a physical skills instructor. So physical fitness was one part of it, but also, arrest and control and handling violent and dangerous people. So I did that for about 13 and a half years.
Wow.
I was the lead trainer at one of Pennsylvania's police academies for that. So I did that, and I just loved training. So that's kind of some of the training backstory, and I'm sure we'll get into more of it. I just had some great training friends and partners for about 6 years. One of my training partners was probably the best lightweight bodybuilder in the country.
Nice.
And so I did a lot of that stuff. So when I retired from law enforcement in 2007, my wife and I moved to Oregon. And so we've been here now for 13 years.
Wow. And why did you choose Oregon?
So I guess, body, brain, soul, right?
Yeah.
I'm a pastor at a church as well. So I was out here in 2000, and just when I was out here in 2000, I was led to. I just felt led that this was going to be our home at some point.
Yeah.
At some point. So when we pulled the pin on my career in 2007, my wife and I, we loaded up, or us and our 2 little girls at the time. They're not a little anymore. They're 20 and 21.
Time warp.
Yeah, they're 20 and 21. And so we moved here, and we've been here ever since.
Amazing.
So that's kind of the quick and dirty. That gets us right here. So that's a little bit about who I am.
And did you feel settled when you moved here? I mean, was it one of those things like, yes, I'm home, this is where I want to be, or did you
absolutely. We love it here, and as our girls get older, and mom and I, we're becoming empty nesters. I think there's a lot more that we would like to see and do, but we're convinced that this is home base.
Gotcha. Yeah, and you can
So,
venture out.
we can venture out.
Of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
And do you do some of the outdoor stuff that this area has to offer?
No, it's anybody that understands entrepreneurship. It was like, I'm probably more busy now, retired, than I ever was, working. So we spend a lot of our time, gym or just kind of around. I've done some things. I grew up in Pennsylvania and Ohio. We get lots of snow.
Yeah.
Lots of snow, and everybody that's like, oh, ski and snowboard, and I go, yeah, that's because you don't shovel that stuff all the time. It's like when you live in it for like 9 months, you don't want to play in it.
Yeah.
So I don't do a lot of
winter
sports. Yeah, no outdoor things. I have a mountain bike, and I'll get out sometimes and do that. I have done some trail hiking. South Sister is one of those things that I like to do.
Yeah.
But no, I keep it, I'm pretty basic. I enjoy the outdoors, but do we do a lot of the things that Central Oregon are known for? No, not a lot, but I don't feel that I'm missing anything.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I live in a beautiful place, and I love it. We love the beach,
Awesome.
so we like to get over to the beach.
Nice.
So we do.
You mean the Oregon coast?
The Oregon coast.
I don't think we can call it the beach.
Okay. we
No, I'm
the
teasing.
Oregon coast.
I was just clarifying.
Yes, ma'am.
It can be cold out there.
It can be. We were just over there a couple of weeks ago, and it was beautiful.
Yeah, and you never know. And it's
You're
so
right.
stunning when it is. I mean,
It was
in all weather, actually, I really enjoy the coast. So
It was
that's
amazing.
great.
It was amazing.
So, what about martial arts? Did you train in some martial arts during?
I have trained in martial arts for about 50, almost 30 years now. So originally, I started in an Okinawan form called Goju-Ryu, and I did that for a really short period of time. I had a really good friend who was into Indonesian martial arts, and I studied an Indonesian martial art called Pukulan for probably about 2 years. And then I had a good friend in college. He studied a form of Chinese martial art called Kung Tao. And that's where I got my black belt in Kung Tao. And, if they go, I've never really heard of it. It's really similar to Salat. So, think Indonesian, Filipino kind of a flavor. So I did that for a long time.
And would you say it's fighting style? It's self-defense? Or
Yes.
Is it weaponry?
All of it.
Yeah.
All of it, right. So, its primary function, just because it was, born out of the jungles in Indonesia, it was a fighting system. So, not really given to a lot of the way we think of martial arts taught in the United States, where there are tournaments and things like that. So it was a fighting system primarily. Then around 1997, I met a group of guys that lived in the city just north of me, and they studied JKD, so Bruce Lee's philosophy.
Yeah.
And I hooked up with them, and I was hooked. So I got into Jeet Kune Do concepts probably around 1997, and I studied with them for about 6-7 years. So a lot of boxing, a lot of stick work, that's where I was introduced to jiu-jitsu. So that's kind of a background there. But my primary art is the Chinese art of Kung Tao. Although I love boxing, I love to box. I love the sticks.
Yeah. Do you still train in all your forms, or what is your?
So primarily, you met my good friend Coach Holly when we came in. So she's been my personal client probably ever since I've been here, so about 12 years. So twice a week, her and I always we mix it up. So she enjoys learning. So I kind of teach her. Right now I'm back actually training with a coach that I trained with about 16 years ago, and we're doing a lot of stuff virtually because of where he is in COVID, and it's actually been really fortuitous because he had migrated away from kind of personal coaching to his businesses primarily around training law enforcement military groups. So he was only training his instructor cadre, so he wasn't doing any private lessons, and I ran into him at an event in January, and we reconnected, and so he calls it the garage gym. So it's the Spear system by Coach Tony Blauer. So I'm virtual calls, and he coaches about 200 of us through the week.
That's so good.
Yeah, so it's been pretty cool because it's like a one-on-one coaching session with him.
That's great.
We have a good time. So I do that, and then I'll box and do stick work. Probably twice a week.
Good.
Yeah.
How would you say your martial arts, I know obviously what it's done for you probably physically, but for the mind, for the zen, the heart, the spirit, like, can you give a little opinion on that and how that's changed your life?
That's a deep question. I think when I remember the instructor that I studied with in Kung Tao. I remember him asking me, "Why do you want to study?" And I remember saying, "I want to get my black belt." And he said, "Why do you want your black belt?" And I said, "Because it means that I would have mastered it." And I remember him saying that when you reach the black belt level, and it didn't make sense to me then, it makes a lot of sense to me now, he says, then you're ready to learn. And I remembered when I got my black belt, he put his black belt on me. And his black belt, because he'd been studying for like 4 years, his black belt almost looked white again. It was just worn and tattered. And I remembered, thinking, I think I understand. So how I approach martial art is as a tool to constantly examine me. I'm always examining myself. Why am I doing this? What is the purpose in it? Does this still make sense? So I'm always using it as a tool to constantly refine who I am as a person now. I think at one point it was, to be able to defend myself, and now so much more, just because I'm so much more aware of the things that can happen, especially when people engage in combat.
Right.
I'm so much more interested in learning how not to become engaged in all of those things.
Absolutely.
So it's almost like my practice facilitates this understanding on a bigger level so that I don't engage in those things. So it's constantly a personal introspection kind of a task. And so I'm just constantly refining who I am as a person. I hope that I'm getting quieter and more gentle as I get older.
That's amazing. Thank you for that very honest and real answer.
Well, you're welcome. You're welcome.
So now, let's continue the journey. So you moved to Redmond, and then what was next for you in your second stage of career, or 10th stage of career, whatever it was.
So I remember on the drive here, we're driving here. My wife says, "What are you gonna do?" Because I think every wife is like, "Do you have a plan?" Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't. Not that she even needs to agree with it. She just needs to go, "Do you have one? Do you have a plan?" And I said, "I think I'll get a job at a gym as a trainer." So I'm landed here on a Monday. I think by that Saturday, I had a job at the big gym here in Redmond. I worked front desk for a while, and then became their personal training manager and personal trainer. So I ran the personal training group at the gym, and I was there for probably about 7 months. And so now you got to think 2008-ish. This is the time that CrossFit. But this is also the time that CrossFit is really kind of starting to get its legs as a new way to train and exercise. Through actually Coach Blauer, I met the founder of CrossFit in 2006, and I was completely intrigued at its original mandate. And I have to say that because personally, being kind of what I think is a little bit of an old schooler, I think it kind of migrated away at some point from what what I understood it to be, and it became, you know, very competition heavy and those kinds of things. And again, there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
It's not a wrong thing. It was just at some point it became not right for me.
Yes.
But I don't think that it's a bad thing. So I think a lot of what we're experiencing right now, the growth in the fitness industry and all of the things, the rebirth of Olympic weightlifting and powerlifting and strongman, I think really all should shake CrossFit's hand for giving people permission to get off the couch and actually explore physicality in a completely different way. So I think that it actually breathed life back into a whole lot of other things. We met, I met the founder of CrossFit 2006. I remember telling my wife, you know, I think this has got something. We move here. I'm at the gym, and the owner of the gym, I said to him, hey, have you ever heard of this CrossFit thing? And he goes, no, what is that? And I remember we started doing CrossFit in the main gym, and it just kind of took off. Well, September of 2008, my wife and I and two friends, we opened this physical location as a CrossFit affiliate, and we were a CrossFit affiliate for about 8 years. And then, you know, just personal growth. At one point in time, I wanted to be a professional bodybuilder, so I had that kind of idea. I was always doing powerlifting kind of training, and I just kind of went full circle. You know, CrossFit kind of gave me permission again to explore once again, and I kind of came back to some things and said, you know, I had great success bodybuilding, so why am I excluding that? And I had great success powerlifting, why am I excluding that? So we kind of just started you know, migrating back in there, and then I found strongman and kind of fell in love with strongman. I just thought strongman was like the greatest thing. I was always intrigued with it from the outside. You know, I kind of looked at it. Then I started competing in it and coaching in it, and the Lord blessed me, and I've had the opportunity to coach some fantastic athletes, females, in strongman. So 2014, we coached the middleweight 160-pound national champ. She's, you know, remains one of our dearest friends. She's a phenomenal person. And we had national level qualifier in 2018 in the middleweight division, as well as a heavyweight competitor that qualified for nationals last year. Wow. So, and those two were actually trained remotely. So I would see them probably once or twice, you know, leading into competitions to work on some things, but most of their work we did remotely.
That's impressive.
So
pre-COVID even.
Yeah, pre-COVID. Pre-COVID.
Again, you're so ahead of the game.
Yeah. So that's what we, you know, been doing. And then probably 6 years ago, we really got into kettlebells. I've been a fan of Pavel's for, I don't know, over 20 years. Pavel wrote for a magazine called Muscle Media 2000, and I was into bodybuilding, and so I read a lot of Pavel's work and followed a lot of his protocols, so I knew that he had the goods. And I remember when he started RKC and all of that stuff. So about 6 years ago, we went to a TSC up in Washington, and fortuitously, we were at Andrea Chang's gym, Kettlebellity up there, and the community, who they were, just everything about them just drew us in, and you know, just how I feel God ordains moments in our life. I go to my level 1 in Tucson, Arizona, a gym called Tucson Strength. So it was run by a guy named Danny Sawaya, who's a team leader, and we had 14 people in my level 1.
Wow.
So lots of personalized coaching, lots of one-on-one, and that's where I met Master Czar Horton, who is now one of my dearest friends on the planet. Danny Sawaya is a huge influence to me, and that just, you know, strong first is something that we embrace fully and wholeheartedly,
Sure.
and that's, of course, connected with folks like John Oden
Yes.
and things like that, who John is becoming one of my dearest friends.
Yeah.
And he coaches me in mobility.
I know. Yeah, that's the best part.
So he's my mobility coach.
Yes.
And so he's always kind of tweaking and helping me move a little bit better.
Right.
And
Well, and it helps recovery.
it does. It does. So that's kind of what we do now. I spend the lion's share of my time doing personalized coaching.
Mm-hmm.
My wife coaches some classes. Coach Holly coaches our kettlebell classes. I do mostly personalized coaching and working with competitive athletes. So
Mhm.
athletes that come in and say, "Hey, we want to do X,"
Mm-hmm.
then I'm the one that works.
You're like the one who helps them get to their goal.
Yes, ma'am.
What would you say? Thank you for sharing all that.
Oh, you're welcome so much.
What would you say is kind of your best way to inspire people?
The best way to inspire
Or your
people.
favorite way, or your
I heard a term just last week, and I think it represents who I believe that I've been made to be and what I've always tried to do. The term is a Zulu term, and it's sawubona. And sawubona means I see you. I think the way that I inspire people is I see them. And in seeing them, what I do is I hold their hand or I help them see themselves. And once somebody can see who they really are, I think then the world opens up for them. So, because motivation is constantly dangling the carrot out in front of them, and that's why it gets me emotional.
Yeah,
Kind of think
it's
of that.
very moving, actually. Everything you just said.
So when you're trying to motivate somebody, it's almost like you're trying to, kind of push them along someplace. What I try to do is get inside with them and say, okay, let's journey together. And inspiration literally means in spirit. It's if you study the Bible, and I'm not saying anybody needs to or doesn't need to. It's just who I am. So
Sure.
I always speak in
You
that
reference that,
in
of
that
course.
context. In the Bible, the spirit was the breath, and the breath represented life. So when you're talking about inspiring someone, I think we have to connect their vision to life. So what I try to do is what the German philosopher Goethe said is if you see a man the way that he is, he only becomes worse. If you see him the way that he could be, then he becomes what he should be. So I'm always trying to see people. And so when I tell them sawubona literally means I see you, not just you, this expression, this external image of you, but I see you. I see where you're struggling in your failures. I see your hopes. I see your dreams. I see your aspirations. I see them. So once I connect there, then what I help them do is see themselves. That's how
Beautiful.
That's how I inspire.
That's really...
I try to.
Well, I'm inspired already. That was amazing.
Oh,
Thank you
thank you.
so much.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's emotional for me.
It is. Well.
It was a lot of, my wife, she says a lot to me. She says, sometimes you gotta create some space. And I don't know, I don't know any other way than to actually roll up my sleeves and get in the trenches with people. I don't know how to do that. Dan John is a coach that I truly enjoy, and he had a saying, I heard him say one time, the body is one piece. So I don't know how to help someone physically without also touching them emotionally, relationally, spiritually, mentally. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to just go, hey doc, we're gonna do 5 sets of 3, without also going, hey, how was your day?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how many training sessions I've changed over the years because a client will walk in and I will say, how are you? And they look at me and completely lose it because they trust me, they believe that I have their best interests at heart, and they can see that I can see them. So they share, and then we've changed training sessions. It's like, oh yeah, we're gonna hit a 3-rep max deadlift today, and you're like, my dog just died, my kid's sick, my husband just lost his job, and I'm like, oh, you're not gonna be at your best today doing that.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a walk and a talk. Sometimes it's a, hey, let's throw on some boxing gloves and let's hit the bag. And sometimes it's like, hey, this would be a great day to go on a 5,000 meter row. So I don't know how to coach people without seeing them. I just don't know how to do it.
Well, I think that's a beautiful gift. Yeah, and I'm sure that that's what draws your people to you.
I hope. I hope. That's a hope. Maybe a little bit of ego. I hope that people would say, I'm a little bit better because I spent some time with Tom. That's what I hope.
That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm very touched by all of this.
No, thank you.
I really appreciate you sharing. And,
thank you.
how would you, to segue into that, and not to keep going deeper, but
Oh no, it's good. It's good.
How do you inspire yourself? Or what inspires you?
Oh man, you're coming up with some great questions. Somebody asked me maybe 2 years ago, what would I say to 20-year-old me? And so that really has me thinking a lot. And what inspires me is to constantly be moving toward a version of myself that my older self would be proud of. I would like, I turned 50 next month.
Congrats.
Thanks. Yeah, I turned 50 next month.
I'm hot on your heels.
That's awesome.
A couple years, still.
I would like 60-year-old Tom to look back at 50-year-old Tom and say thank you. So that's what inspires me. Am I continuing to be the best version of myself mentally, emotionally, relationally, spiritually, and physically? I was a competitive athlete. I played basketball in high school and college, and competed in strongman and bodybuilding. And there's an image when I could do so many things, and now it's different now.
Yeah.
So I'm constantly going, okay, what does the strongest physical version of Tom look like at 50?
Right.
Who am I at 50? So those are the things that inspire me on a personal level, and I enjoy learning. So I learn something every day. I'm always reading. I'm constantly reading something.
Nonfiction, I assume, mostly.
I read a lot of, digress.
Yeah, let's do it.
I cannot read fiction. I can't read fiction. I can listen to fiction. So if I listen to a fiction book, it's like an audio book.
Sure.
I can listen to it.
Storytelling.
Yeah, it's story. But I can't read a non-fiction or a fiction book. All my reading is pretty much non-fiction.
Right.
And it's either I'm reading something about training, I'm reading something about personal development, I'm reading something spiritual, I'm reading something related to coaching or relationship building or
Sure.
leadership. So, you know, the fact that God gives me breath and I get to learn something new today, that's inspiring to me. And it's like, there's something to be learned today. So
Yeah,
that's
and that's growth and change and resilience, really.
resilience.
Moving forward in life.
I love it, yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the things that has helped me in my own training and my own martial arts learning is just this like coming back to center, you know, and finding, I mean, you mentioned it a little bit too, just finding your better self and feeling inspired from the spirit, you know, within. And I keep coming back to the breath, and I love that you kind of brought that into full circle, because I think that there's an awareness societally of breath right now. I mean, interestingly, the virus, you know, has shown us the importance of breathing and breathing well. How do you find your own connection to breath?
How do I find my own connection to breath? I think I think about it when I'm in a moment where I'm not. If that makes sense. So I know one of the practices that Coach Odin has me doing is, you know, just in my resets, it's, you know, just being more aware of my breathing, and you know, when he's asking me to maybe get into some positions that historically have either presented pain or have been difficult, you know, spend some time breathing in those places, you know, so you're starting to connect the breath to a position of strength and control, and so it's that it's funny, you know, it seems cliche-ish, you know, you're in a situation and, you know, things are heightened, and, you know, we've all heard it, you know, take a breath, you know, and if you breathe in those moments, it gives you some space to then kind of think and weigh and consider. So for me, that's probably how I use it a lot. It's interesting, we were having a conversation on the kettlebell swing, and one of, you know, so what I talk about in the kettlebell swing, if I can
Please.
just kind of my thinking, you know, when you think about the kettlebell swing, the body's just in two shapes. It's either in a hinge or it's in a plank. So I started thinking about, well, you know, why do we breathe? What's the purpose of, you know, that strong breath that we take, you know, when we're doing kettlebell swings? So inhaling, going into the hinge, exhaling, going to the plank. So why do that? And I was just kind of thinking about that. And this is just the world according to Tom. The breath protects us in between structures. So moving from the hinge is a strong structure. The plank is a strong structure. Where does the breath take place? The breath takes place in between those structures. So as I'm getting to structure, the breath protects. So, you know, I've been thinking about the breath that way. So the breath protects me as I'm moving between structures in relationship. So our relationship is in flux. So having the ability to take a breath and give us some protection, so I don't say something that later on I'm not going to be able to walk away from as easy. So taking a breath, the breath protects me. I'm dealing with something that's mentally challenging. The breath protects me as I, you know, kind of expand my awareness and problem solve and some of those things. So that's how I've been kind of thinking about the breath a little bit more, if that
Yeah,
really makes any
no,
sense.
I really think that's amazing because it is, I mean, because it stimulates that parasympathetic nervous system, our rest, recovery, digest, you know, I think you're spot on because those are the vulnerable situations, right? I mean, think about animals.
Yes.
When they're resting, they're in their most vulnerable state.
Most vulnerable.
And I think all of us, when I have patients who aren't sleeping, let's say, and they come in for whatever, an ankle injury or something, where am I going to start? I'm going to start with the sleep, of course, because that's their recovery. That's their, like, you know, they can rejuvenate during that time.
Absolutely.
And that's when healing happens.
Absolutely.
Right? And so, and teaching them to breathe allows that process to start.
Absolutely.
They can get tapped in again. So I love the way you describe that. I just finished my 10,000 swings yesterday.
I saw that you were like 500 left.
Saturday I finished.
Yeah, I was looking and she was like, I got 500 more swings left.
Yeah, and honestly, those last 500 were some of the hardest ones.
Absolutely.
Because I wanted them to be really good still.
Absolutely.
But I was like so darn close, like, but I wish that I had had the breath conversation with you prior, even though I really was, looking back, I was using it that way.
Yeah.
But to just, you know, the way you just kind of embodied it and spoke it was.
And it's the world according to Tom, everybody.
I think
you know, so
useful.
I was just kind of thinking about it, and you know, and I love mixed martial arts, right? So a lot of boxing.
Did you watch the fights on Saturday?
I did not watch the fights on Saturday.
Rose was great. The Holloway fight was good. Anyway.
I watch a lot of it, and if you listen, you know, we look at the flair and the pomp and circumstance of the fight, but I'm always looking at, you know, the technical things, you know, oh, did they see that opening, or oh, they did see that opening.
Right.
So one of the things, if you listen to boxers or MMA people, when they're throwing punches, you will actually hear the breath that we duplicate in the swing. You will hear that hard style breathing.
For sure.
Well, why? Because when I'm attacking, I'm vulnerable. So I'm not in a structure, you know, where if I'm waiting on something, I'm in a structure that will allow me potentially to take some punishment.
Right.
But when I'm attacking, that's when I'm that's my most vulnerable. So what do? They insert the breath there because the breath protects them in that structure. And so I was just thinking about it, and one day we were in here, I was working with a good friend of mine, and I was just talking about the breathing, and that just kind of struck me, and I said, well, why do we breathe here? Well, the hinge is strong, the plank is strong, but it's the space in between where we're at risk.
Wow.
I've seen people deadlift, pull an amazing deadlift. They're doing everything right, and they hurt themselves putting the weight back on the floor. Right? They just, because they went from this really strong structure to a strong structure, the breath's protecting them, and then they forget, and then they put the weight down poorly.
And that's the injury.
You know, but you know, if they maintain their breath and say, hey, it's not done until I'm back in this strong structure. But I was just thinking about the space in between.
Yeah.
And the breath protects us there. So that's how I've been exploring breathing, and like I said, the work with John, you know, when I'm in some of these positions where, oh, that hurts, and I would want to come out,
right.
you know, come out of it. He's like, well, can you breathe into that place for a little bit? And then I'll spend some time breathing there, and then all of a sudden, it's not bad anymore, and it's like, oh, I now have this new range.
That's right.
And it's the breath that gave me, because what happens when we're in pain or discomfort?
Yep, we seize up.
I'm holding my breath. I'm not breathing, right? So it's like breathe, because it's important. So,
beautiful.
Thank you.
Yes. So let's kind of close up, but I'd love to just hear, like, you know, what your goals are now with your gym, if you have any new visions, and then maybe finish that with, you know, how people can reach out to you if they're interested in connecting.
You know, COVID has has really, kind of changed the game. I think when we left, our kind of our CrossFit idea. I'm a teacher at heart. I love teaching people. I like, seeing people, the light bulbs come on because they go, I never thought about it that way. So I think for us in the gym, we want a place that is a school. That's what we have been trying to create. That we get people to think about strength, maybe initially physically, but that it eventually becomes something that they understand goes well beyond just the physical realm.
Right.
So we're always talking about, again, I see you, emotional, relational, all of those things and how they connect. So, I want that kind of space. I love the kettlebell training. I love the philosophies, the principles of Strong First. So I would probably see us in the years to come really just kind of moving more in that direction. I told John, it's funny, the other day, he presented me with just an amazing present, and gave me this mace that had an engraving on it that means something so personal and dear to me. And I said, if I was starting over from the ground up, kettlebells and maces, and really teaching people how to engage in a physical world physically. So I think as I get older, helping people rediscover that they still have physicality.
Yes.
That's what I want to do. Peter's class where I met you, I had forgot to play in training. It was always work. It was like I go in and I gotta get this done.
Get it done, right?
Get this done. I gotta knock it out. And now I'm starting to have fun. The mace is fun for me because I'm playing. I'm learning something.
Curious and
It is. I like that word. It's curious. And so yes, I want to create a space, and I think my wife would be on board with having a space where people can be curious about their physicality.
Yes.
And then in the process they can learn about themselves and about other people. So that's kind of where I would like to ultimately see the gym go.
That's great. I meant to ask you about the Ethos of Strength.
Oh yeah.
It seems like a good time right now.
So in Greek, they had three terms. So logos was logic or the word. Pathos was emotion. So when you see them talking about the pathos, they're talking about emotion. Ethos was culture, or the quality of the thing. So when I heard Dan John say the first time, the body is one piece, I don't know why that always stuck with me, but it just kind of resonated with me. So the ethos of strength was this idea that the inability to display strength in any of the areas that I kind of penciled down on or kind of narrowed in on and said, I think these pillars represent who we are as humans. Mental, emotional, how we think and feel. Relational, how we engage other people who think and feel. Spiritual strength, and of course I speak of it in a Christian context, but I don't think that we have to limit it to a Christian context, but it is a recognition that there is something bigger than any of us, regardless of what name you put to it. it's a realization that there is something bigger than we are, and then physical strength. This conveyance that we are living this life in. So my idea, or kind of my thesis statement, was that if I possess an inability to display strength in any area, any one of those areas, it affects the ability to display strength in any of the other areas. So, if I'm having a difficulty mentally and emotionally, so I'm not displaying strength mentally and emotionally, how does that affect my relationships?
Right. Of course.
If I had a hip replacement 5 years ago, and me and my wife had decided, it was at the point, Doc, I was literally sleeping an hour a night.
Yeah.
I was just
so
I
unacceptable.
was just in so much pain.
I mean, that's how we torture people.
Yes, I was in so much. I was in so much pain. So my wife and I had decided that we were going to do the surgery in the fall. We said, okay, I'm gonna get the surgery. Yeah, I'm like, okay, we're gonna do the surgery in the fall. She and I are having a conversation in March, and she mentioned that one of the ladies said, or asked her, she said, "Is Tom okay?" And she said, his hip's bad, and he's got to have surgery on it, and he's not sleeping very good, he's in pain all the time. And the lady said, one of the students here said, "Oh, that makes sense." She said, "Because he's different." And I said to my wife, I said, "I'm not different." And my wife goes, "Yeah, you are." And I said, "How?" And she said, "You walk around with this low-grade anger all the time." So I'm experiencing an inability to display strength physically because I'm in pain. And it was affecting me mentally and emotionally. And I was displaying it relationally, but I was completely unaware.
You couldn't see.
I couldn't see it. So the ethos is really all about how do we become the strongest, most powerful versions of ourselves by our ability to express strength in all of those 4 pillars. Can I be strong physically? And when I say strong physically, it's relative.
Of course.
I'm not saying everybody needs a deadlift 500
Yeah.
pounds, but if you can't do basic things in
Get
life,
up and down off the floor.
right?
Run
Because
around
you
if you need to.
that is going to affect other areas of your life. If you think that this is all there is to existence, and there is not something else outside, and I think every religion or belief has some idea of faith. If you have no faith, how does that affect how you relate to people and just everything? And if you don't have powerful, authentic relationships, how does that affect all those things? If me and the missus are not connecting emotionally and on a relational level, I don't want to train.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't want to train. Lose a child, a spouse. You're not going to the gym.
Yeah.
Or dog. It's a relation.
Yeah,
it's a relationship. So that's the idea behind the ethos is how do I help people become the strongest, most vibrant expressions of themselves, kind of looking at these 4 pillars of strength.
It's beautiful. And I love the structure of it because it's so applicable to every human.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes.
So that's Tom in a nutshell. You know, I'm just kind of
Perfect.
you know, I feel honored and privileged that people trust me and I get to walk with so many amazing people on life's journey. I was talking to my good friend Coach Holly today, and I said, you know, we were actually talking about podcasts, and I said, you know, some of the the podcasts that everybody will tune into, you know, we want to listen to Will Smith, and we want to hear from Joe Rogan,
Right.
and we want to hear, and I said, but you know, there are so many what I call ordinarily extraordinary people walking around, and I think their stories are equally as important for us to engage in and share, because your story may give me some insight into understanding my story, or the courage to share my story, which may help someone in their story. So I believe we're all connected.
Absolutely. That's great.
Thank you.
So how can people find you if they're interested in learning more?
Well, awesome. So our gym, we have a website for our gym. So if somebody was really interested in kind of checking us out, it's www.breakthroughstrengthandperformance.com.
Okay.
I would do that different if I could do it over. It's like the longest, the longest. So that's our gym website. I'm on Instagram as the Ethos of Strength. So you know, I try to put out something daily in terms of something to think about. I'll throw some videos up where I'm having thoughts and I'm engaging people and just in conversation. Some things to think about there. I'm in the process of getting a little YouTube channel up, and that'll be the Ethos of Strength.
Great.
YouTube. So
Wonderful.
those are the places where everybody can kind of connect with me and our gym.
Okay. All right. Well, Cali Sticks next time I'm here.
Cali, let's do
Cali
it.
Sticks, please. That
Let's
was so fun.
do it. Absolutely. It's so much fun.
It was so fun.
It was so fun, wasn't it?
The playfulness, like you said, and just being outside, and I mean, I felt this sense of aliveness again. I mean, not that I feel pretty vibrant most of the time, but there's something about that kind of movement that just sparks, some awesome.
Yeah, you were tons of fun. You were just smiling and laughing, and I think everybody experienced the same. The whole group experienced the same thing.
And it just lifts those inhibitions, I think, too, or those self-conscious moments of so we can step into more authenticity. I think, and Peter Wolf obviously has such a great way of inviting that.
He was amazing.
Yeah, drawing that out in people, which is great. So
absolutely.
So I'm excited to in future journeys cross paths with all of you more. So
well, like I said, John and I have connected. We've known each other for a bit, and it's just timing. And sometimes life is all about a moment. And he and I have reconnected on a deeper, richer level. So I'm sure that you'll see me, quite a bit as you train with him. I know, so I'll pop in from time to time.
Good. I look forward to it. Well, thank you so much for being here today. It's an honor and a privilege to have you.
Thank you.
I